It is August 14th. It's a Thursday. My name is Matt Reardon, and we do have a tropical storm that we are keeping an eye on in the central Atlantic. We have been tracking Erin kind of all week long here, and each morning, frankly, as we've looked at it in satellite, it has not looked very impressive. Now, the expectation is that we went through the week, it would begin to ramp up and organize a bit. And frankly, here on Thursday morning, about 6 a.m. Central Time, I think we're starting to see that ramp up begin. If we just look at the storm visually, it has some dense tropical thunderstorms around it. If you look closely, you can kind of see some mid-level spin in here around these thunderstorms. You can almost kind of see them spinning around each other, so that we have our mid-level spin. We very likely have a low-level center underneath that. We can kind of make that out with some of these low clouds just outside some of the higher returns here. And then outside the storm, we have this kind of broad cirrus outflow, and you can kind of see these upper-level clouds emanating away from the system. And when we kind of check all these boxes, we tend to get fairly predictable increases in intensity. So that's the expectation going forward, that this storm looks to me at this point like it wants to be a hurricane either in the next 24 to 48 hours. Sooner than later wouldn't surprise me at this point. And that is the National Hurricane Center forecast for Erin, currently in the central Atlantic. Going to be increasing in strength toward major hurricane status. That's Category 3 plus as we get into this weekend. And then we have this kind of pivot or fork in the road to see, is it going to go out to sea like expected, or is it going to sneak a little bit closer to the mainland U.S., or it could cause some more significant problems? I'll get into that in a second. I did want to mention we are looking at just kind of a weak little thunderstorm system over here in the Bay of Campeche that's down here in the southwest Gulf. That's going to be pushing very quickly toward the northwest today, where it could strengthen at the last second into a tropical system, maybe a tropical storm, but likely regardless of that, bringing some gusty winds and some tropical rainfall up towards southern Texas, kind of the Corpus Christi area. So have to keep an eye on that today, a little bit more of a near-term threat. And we'll talk about that all in just a second here. I did want to get back to Hurricane Erin here. I'm going to go back to 2018 for a second. I'm going to see if I can restart this. This was Hurricane Florence, ended up making landfall in North Carolina here. This was, again, back from August of 2018. Now, this storm, as I'm going to play this forecast forward here, when it was in the central Atlantic, kind of into a similar spot, the consensus was that the storm was going to recurve out to sea, actually east of Bermuda. And what we're looking at here is the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone going through time. And so we're going to see, as the storm pushed across the Atlantic, what did that cone look like, and how did it adjust for the ultimate position of Florence as it's made its way across the Atlantic. And you'll notice that early on in the forecast period, you kind of saw this recurve action, but then it shifted. So we got to the middle of the week, again, like Thursday, it shifted, and by Friday or Thursday of that next week, we ended up having a hurricane making landfall in southern North Carolina, Carolinas, flooding rain, wind issues, flooding up into the Appalachians. So this was kind of the warning call that when we're confident we're looking at a recurve, a week out, these forecasts can shift. So that's something to remember here with Hurricane Erin, potential Hurricane Erin. That's still being a week out. I can't say definitively that this thing is going out to sea, albeit that does look like the likely scenario at this point. And I did mention in the southwest Gulf, we are watching the system here. Yesterday, it had better thunderstorms around it, and you can kind of see a little bit of low-level circulation in these low clouds here. It's hard to see, but it is there, and we are seeing some renewed development here today. So again, this system could spin up quickly here. I don't think it's going to reach hurricane status, but it's on its way toward the northwest, where it could bring some gusty winds and rain. And kind of, if I just look around it, you see these wispy cirrus here. Those are kind of moving in that direction. You see these high clouds here. Those are moving in that direction. So we have some divergence here near this low-level center of circulation. And then if you see, there's some high clouds in here. I know they're hard to see. I'm like splitting hairs here. But there's these like wispy cirrus that develop here. And you notice that they don't move. They're not moving this way. They're not moving that way. They're not moving this way very quickly. I mean, they don't have much movement to them. That tells me that generally over this area, there's not much shear at all. So if this system wants to get going in short order, it could make a run at tropical storm strength. I don't think it's likely at this point, neither does the National Hurricane Center, but I can't rule it out that this quickly develops into our next named system, which I think we're at E. The next one would be F, so that'd be Ferdinand, or Fernand, I believe. If we look at the tropical storm tracks from the ECMWF ensemble, we can see it tries to bring up maybe a little bit system into here into South Texas. None of these really reaching tropical storm strength, but again, can't rule it out. Some of these look a little bit stronger. And then here is Tropical Storm Erin making that recurve in a number of these ensemble members here. So the suite very much taking it out to sea. If I kind of play this backwards, you can see that by about Wednesday or Thursday of next week, this has made the turn out to sea. But consider that it's Thursday now. I'm talking about Wednesday to Thursday next week. So we have to watch the system closely. Some of these tracks take it much closer to the mainland US, where if it's down here at this point this weekend, I think we're looking at a different sort of forecast envelope, if you will, with a lot more members sneaking closer to the mainland US. Again, that's not a likely scenario because most of these members are toward the north or east, but something that we'll still have to watch as we kind of go through the week this week and over the weekend. Now, I'm going to take this forecast. This is our trough ridge pattern. Let's bring this back to about the start again. Recording this about 6 a.m., so I'll make it valid around that time. And if we look at that pattern here today, I'm going to take this forward. Let's take this out to Thursday to Friday. We can see a ridge strengthening here over the central US. Let's call this like the St. Louis ridge. And that's going to bring some heat into this corridor here as we go through the week and then the weekend. And then we're also looking at some ridging here over near Bermuda. And these hurricanes are often going to follow that trough ridge pattern. So they're going to feel the steering currents of the upper atmosphere around it. And that's what's going to steer these systems. So as I take this forecast into Monday and now Tuesday of next week, we still see this kind of St. Louis ridge entrenched across a wide area across the central United States. That's going to bring in heat and dry conditions to this corridor here for mid-August. We've been talking about that. And we also see that Bermuda high has started to back off a bit to the east. Notice it's almost not even over Bermuda. And with this troughing here over the Canadian Maritimes, it has left this kind of escape route where these hurricanes often flow between these ridges. And that's why we see this recurve action between the two and the forecast going out into late next week. Now, if these were to link up, this kind of St. Louis ridge and this Bermuda ridge, you can see they're almost trying to like reach out and touch here. If those link up, this system shifts toward the west, and we got big problems over here in the Carolinas. So that's the forecast scenario that we have to watch going through this weekend, because these ridges are pretty close to one another if they were to link up. Now, we do see as we go out into next week, what was the St. Louis ridge starts translating back to like a Salt Lake City ridge. That's going to help this storm sneak up in this corridor here, but it's going to bring the heat back further west. So this is relevant for our forecast of the continental United States. Now, regardless, I do want to keep an eye on Erin because it's expected to strengthen into a major hurricane. Most of the models have either a Cat 3, some have a Cat 2 here, some even have a Cat 4. So again, a few more days worth watching before we can definitively say that this system is out to sea. Now, I did mention that ridge over the central part of the country that's bringing heat into the central and high plains here today. You can see upper 90s. So a wide corridor here from the Dakotas all the way down into the Texas Panhandle. So take this forecast into Friday, that ridge expanding here toward the east. See high temperatures ballooning into the 90s now all the way on Saturday, all the way from like York, Nebraska, east over toward Pennsylvania, getting into the upper 80s, still seeing some cooler temperatures here over the Carolinas underneath some precipitation, but a much more wide corridor of heat as we go through this weekend. Take this forecast into Sunday, again now through Maine, toward the Front Range, seeing 90s or upper 80s. That continues on Monday, and by Tuesday, we start to see this ridge translating back to the west. I mentioned maybe Salt Lake City becoming the new anchor for it. As I go into Wednesday, you can see the heat retreating into the Intermountain West, and finally cooler temperatures, a cold front, likely some precipitation chances as we go through next week and this corridor here. There's our heat relief by the middle to late part of the next work week. If we look at the all hazards map just here this morning, let's make this valid about 6 a.m. We'll zoom it in. Red flag warnings over the Front Range and the near Mountain West. Central Plains, we see some heat advisories here and over the lower Mississippi River Valley, along with portions of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina here. If we jump over and look at the radar mosaic, just valid as of this morning here, can see some lingering showers here over the Carolinas, lingering showers here over eastern Nebraska and South Dakota. Otherwise, largely quiet here in August. This is somewhat common. I'm going to jump and play this 3-kilometer AM forecast forward, get an idea of where these storms are going to be developing today. 6 a.m., 8 a.m. Let's take this into this afternoon. And then into this evening, could see some development here across eastern North Dakota, southern Minnesota, maybe even back toward northern South Dakota. Not seeing as much precipitation over the southeast here today as we've seen over the last 2 weeks. So take this forecast overnight tomorrow into Friday afternoon. See more development here along the Front Range, all the way from Arizona. Seeing the monsoon kick up in activity a little bit here, and then over toward Minnesota potentially, and then the high plains near Wyoming. Otherwise, relatively quiet. Man, look at the monsoon going down here in Arizona, northern Mexico. In fact, if I take this forecast a little bit backwards, let's do Friday morning. I actually see some thunderstorm, pretty healthy thunderstorm signal over the Phoenix near the Tucson metro area. So I'll have to keep an eye on that monsoon might be getting into these higher populated areas There's a decent chance of that over the next 48 hours. We do see that thunderstorm complex, the kind of shower complex that was over the Carolinas here this morning, pushes out over the Atlantic, and then the NAM, which is prone to kind of erroneously spinning up these little tropical systems, does produce maybe a little spin up here, but can't rule that out. Maybe something to keep an eye on. And then I'm going to play this back again. Friday morning, a lot happening, kind of that time frame. There's that potential weak system we were talking about there coming up into South Texas with some rainy, gusty winds there. Just something to keep an eye on. If we also look out Friday afternoon, the Pacific Northwest, which has been dry this summer, getting on some rain here, especially western Washington, west of the elevation, seeing if some of this can get into the Willamette Valley. Some signal of that here. The Willamette Valley this year has been dry as well. So a lot happening on Friday, and as we go through the day on Saturday, some heavier rainfall through this corridor here. This is a swath where we're looking at a nice chance for 1 to 2 inches over the next kind of week period. If we jump over and look at the SPC outlook, this is the day 1 convective outlook. You can see this area here in eastern North Dakota, northern Minnesota. It's stretching down into Nebraska, even into northern Iowa here for some potential thunderstorm and severe development here over the Dakotas and Minnesota. If we jump over and look at the 7-day precipitation forecast from the ECMWF, make this a little bit bigger. Measurable precip expected for the Willamette Valley, maybe some of this getting into central Washington. This corridor has been dry this year, so rooting for some of this precipitation there. The southeast over the next 7 days, not nearly as much rainfall that we've seen maybe over the last 2 to 3 weeks, but there is some signal here. There's Erin that we talked about. And then the monsoon starting to show some life up into the front range here, eastern Arizona. This forecast specifically from the ECMWF, this was, I think this is the older forecast here. So let's see if I can jump over and get oh no, this is the 0Z. We did get it updated. So I think Phoenix will end up with more than 500ths of rainfall. We'll see. Friday morning, that signal looked pretty decent here. But even over toward Tucson and southwest New Mexico, that monsoon is showing some life here. I am watching this corridor here closely. North Texas up into Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Indiana, portions of Illinois. We have seen this slow shift drier in this corridor. In fact, if we just look at the soil moisture deficits, you can start to find some areas in here that are struggling a bit. Eastern Kentucky, Western Virginia, over here in Arkansas, certainly New England. We've talked about northern and eastern Illinois, with some drought classifications lingering here in northwest Iowa, northern Indiana. So rooting for some of this precipitation here to get into some of these areas to bring some rainfall. Look at Michigan, fortunately seeing some of that activity as well here. But we are seeing with August, with this ridging and this heat building into this area, we need some rainfall to stave off some water and heat stress. Look at the 7-day precipitation just as a departure from the average. You can see this corridor here, wider than average, but outside of it, kind of that corridor I was talking about, Arkansas, Texas, up through New England. This area here is still staying dry. Even Florida now, not seeing as much southeastern precipitation over the 7 to 10-day forecast. There's the monsoon showing some activity, however, and then the Pacific Northwest needing this rainfall here. If we jump over and just show you the 10-day, it doesn't look much different, just filling in a little bit here over Nebraska at this point. We are developing a product that we want to add over on ag weather. So this shows you the 10-day anomaly. But if you're ever curious like how this impacts the different belts, the different crop belts, either the corn belt, the winter wheat belt, or the soybean belt, we wanted a way to kind of quantify or visualize how much of that belt is getting meaningful rainfall. So we developed a system to do that. It's still kind of in development. We're ironing out each of the different crop belts right now, but I'll give you a preview of it. I'm going to show you the same 10-day forecast anomaly that's from the ECMWF here, but this just highlights, now this one is the corn belt. And we can bend this in different ways. We can kind of generally see, here's maybe the wider area of the corn belt. This is certainly the heart of it here. And you can see some of the corn belt, particularly the northern and western, getting in on some precipitation. But we can actually average this out by production and then weight it by bushels. And we show that Corn Belt is losing about a 1/4 inch of rainfall than it would typically get over the 10-day period. As you can see, not even averaging out an inch over the 10 days. So that shows us that this is a dry forecast for the Corn Belt. We could add on the soybean belt and the winter wheat belt to this as well and kind of give you a perspective of how much of the production acreage is getting meaningful rainfall. So excited about that. Look for that kind of in the next few weeks or months. I do want to jump over. This is the ECMWF ensemble forecast. I'm taking this way out. This is Saturday of next week, so all the way out to August 23rd. There's that Salt Lake Ridge that we talked about. At this point, Erin has made that recurve action out to sea. And this is responsible for ultimately the cool down here in the eastern U.S. As this ridge backs off over the Intermountain West, it allows some troughing to get in here over the east. Now, the problem is if this was occurring in late June or early July, we'd have that northwest flow spilling out over into the Corn Belt. because we've shifted drier in this area here, we're not transpiring as much water now that the corn is out of those pollination periods, and we're not seeing as much thunderstorm development in some of those areas here that I talked about lingering on the drier side here in early August. So if I jump out and show you some of the 8 to 14 day outlooks, this from the GFS ensemble, you can see these drier forecasts here getting out into mid to late August. The plains staying wet, the Canadian prairie staying active, the monsoon may be quieting down a little bit after the activity this week, and the southeast staying on the wetter side here. The Pacific Northwest going back over dry, and the middle part of the country here, the Midwest, upper Midwest, potentially going back over dry as well. I'm going to see if I can pull up the CPC precipitation outlook for that 8 to 14 day period. See that similar signature: Pacific Northwest, Great Lakes, the central part of the country. On the drier side, the southeast staying wet, the Front Range, the northern plains, the Canadian prairie, wetter as well. Temperature-wise, there's that Salt Lake Ridge I talked about, and then we have this troughing here over New England. Unfortunately, this isn't, it's a great setup for northwest flow, but as we get into late August, as a drying down period, we don't see as many of those thunderstorms, unfortunately, with that same regime. See some heat lingering over Florida here as well. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, the risk of hazardous temperatures, this is taking us through the 21st, through the 27th. Again, Salt Lake City, down through Arizona, looking at potential heat advisories returning here into the latter part of August, and then the Central Valley potentially with a slight risk for that heat lingering into late August here. I'll end it here today. We are waiting on some of new data for some seasonal forecasting. Might get that on Friday, the 15th from the Climate Prediction Center. Otherwise, it'll probably be on Monday or Tuesday of next week. So we'll be able to update you on a few more of those forecasts, and then potentially getting some new INSO data to see if we're leaning toward that La Nina or maybe INSO neutral conditions as we go through this winter here. A lot pivoting, I think, on that. In the meantime, we have more of the tropics to keep an eye on. We're watching this little system here, excuse me, in the Bay of Campeche. Maybe, can't rule out a little spin up here off the Carolina coast over the next 72 hours, but then certainly the main concern well out here into the central Atlantic is Tropical Storm Erin. You can even see over these last few slides, I know it's small, but an increase in that thunderstorm activity. It would not surprise me if by the end of the day we're seeing something flirting with hurricane strength as this continues its march west, where we still cannot rule out at this time a track closer to the mainland U.S. Eric will talk with you all about that tomorrow, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.